We're rolling. Welcome to tonight's webinar. If we just do a little IT test, sorry for the delay as well. We've got a special guest on today, Ridwan Hannan from One Path Accountants. Just been a little bit of a delay in the background, getting everyone together in the room. Audio works fine, video works fine. Just want to make sure we've got no IT issues, and we'll get straight into it. Today, for those of you that are not familiar with Ridwan, Ridwan is my personal accountant, and we've known each other for about, what, 10 years now?
Yeah, 10 years.
Used to be skinnier and less grey hair and, yeah, all that sort of stuff, mate.
We've got a name for ourselves.
We do. We're bloated. With it, yeah, today, when it comes to tax planning and planning, there's a lot of crap out there, right? Like, a lot of people, you know, I think everybody needs an accountant, right? There's a lot of people trying to do their own accounting themselves, but, you know, we need to, you know, make sure that whoever's representing us, like the way I see accounting is very different to most people see it, and most accountants would see it different. I look at it that I'm getting robbed by the government and they're trying to steal my hard-earned money, and I need someone to protect me from that. So you're my bodyguard when it comes to that. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the accountant has a good brain on them to understand what your goals are, to make sure that they're not just trying to save you a few bucks, because you can go and save a few dollars from the guy at the end of the escalator, and you know, you'll end up paying for a lot more, right? Whether you can't service or whatever. So it's a very fine line of you know, packaging that tax up to, you know, to pay what's fair. You know, some people like paying a lot more things and all that sort of stuff, but at the same time, you want to make sure that your accountant's online to make sure that you are reaching your goals and you've got everything in line to reach your goals. So that's where Ridwan comes in. Accountants are normally boring. This bloke isn't. If you go to my WhatsApp, this is my number one contact to my WhatsApp is Ridwan. So
likewise.
Chat, yeah.
More than our wives.
Well, you know, I was about to say, like, I was going to make jokes, mate, because, like, you know, some people have 4 wives, you know. We're good mates. But today, you know, there's a lot of things happening in the world out there that are very different than beforehand. And I keep talking about, you know, the fact that we might be going into a recession, or that we're most likely going into a depression. The only way to stave off that recession or depression is to keep up the monetary printing that's going on constantly. You know, I know when Ridwan starts talking today, people will be like, wow, Rid talks a lot different than Nathan. He's very polished, right? And he talks, you know, more professional than Nathan would. But I think it's important to look at everything in its place. Like, I can see here we've got the budget up, we've got all this money going everywhere. Some of this stuff can be boring, but, you know, what does it mean, you know, for the budget? Tax time's coming up, how to protect yourself. And I've got something really, really important to talk about, and it's actually, no one knows anything about this. I'd actually forgotten about it until this afternoon when Ridwan said, we're going to talk about this, and I was like, fuck yes, we've been working on this for about 7 years. So if you have a super fund, which would be everybody, if you are concerned about where your money is going to, if you're looking for a safe investment to get into, it doesn't need to be property. Everyone goes to me, I want a liquid investment, I want to know that my money's safe, like putting it in an old term deposit. You know, you can't go to the stock market, they're dropping, you can't go to crypto, that's dropping. In a depression, is where do you put your money to be safe? So tonight I'm going to be launching something that's very new. We can only take on sort of limited numbers to, you know, ensure that part one of it is, you know, it's the founding people to it, which will be very crucial for the growth of this financial instrument. We talk about financial instruments quite a lot, but we've got something that's going to be really exciting. So also looking at how to protect your super fund. If you have parents, I've had a lot of people coming to me recently saying, Nathan, look, my parents, they're 60, they're 70, they're 80, they're going to get screwed right now. They've got no return at the bank. They're putting their money into risky assets. Their share market's gone down by 30% this year, whatever, 20%. You know, I want to be protected for them. You know, we've got a solution for that. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later on tonight. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to you, Red,
Thanks,
to start talking about everything's about tax. So.
Yeah, cool. So just to, I guess, touch on a couple of points that you and I always do is, do you remember the COVID budget that we presented maybe a couple of years ago?
That made me laugh and choke on the water, yes.
So I think Nathan at that point, to his credit, said that they might not give us money the way that they have been, but they'll start doing projects and
infrastructure,
big numbers will start being thrown at you. So a lot of what you're seeing tonight, especially on the first couple of slides, is directly out of the New South Wales budget report and overview. And you'll find that it's a little bit, not deceptive, but I think it's a little bit salesy in the sense that if you look on your screen, you'll see $3.8 billion here, $7.2 billion there, $2.8 billion. A lot of this stuff has been spent during the last year or so, and it's kind of promoting what's happened and how New South Wales has helped us through what is the two most particular issues that they've cited, the third one being the floods, which is the pandemic, the war in Ukraine and Russia, creating a lot of cost of living pressures, and the floods.
I love those excuses. Every time I have a problem, it's like, oh, it's Russia that did it, right? It's definitely got to be, well, I can't get lettuce today because Russia's the problem.
You know, realistic, you know, they actually have a tissue paper shortage, like these tissues,
hey?
Like facial tissues. There's a shortage. I don't know why, but there is.
There's a shortage on concrete, bro.
Yeah.
There's a shortage on concrete. There's a shortage of tiles. There's a shortage of everything.
Which is
the shortage is not the shortage of the product. The shortage is of people wanting to accept dead fiat currency as a means of, exchange. No one wants the money. Who wants the money? Money doesn't buy shit.
So I think the government in and of themselves, and I was reading through the budget overview today, it's pretty interesting in the sense that a lot of it has been aimed at how New South Wales has got us through the pandemic. But not a lot of it is really associated with how they think we're going to fare after it. So what they've sort of told everyone is that we've got an $11.3 billion deficit for FY23, which is big, but we'll come back into black by FY24. So I was wondering, I said, okay, that's a big turnaround. We're getting a lot of money thrown at us here. We're getting land tax potential exemptions with regard to stamp duty. We're getting cost of living relief. Some parts of Sydney are getting, just a really insane amount of money. And so I was reading through the budget notes, and it said that they're going to extinguish the debt by selling 51% or 49%, I should say, of the WestConnex and extinguishing what is a intergenerational or generational fund that they've developed in 2018. I went into that, and the basis of that is they sold the first 51% of the WestConnex. Right. So basically, what's happening is that
so it's sold 102% of it.
So no, 49, 51, 100. But they're doing what we all do: buy property when you need to get the capital and liquidate the capital to do something else, to spend on something else. They're selling assets, right? Yeah. So fundamentally, the same way in which that you always talk to clients about what's the best ways in which to retain their wealth is to be able to have assets to dispose. If you don't have anything, you just have cash in your hand. You don't really have.
If you're 100 grand in cash 2 years ago, and you think, I'm going to go buy all this stuff, 100 grand will buy you a caravan today. And that's,
at best.
And that's before a hyperinflation. That's just early days.
Just purely on normal inflation, right? So I think it's really important that people understand that the mechanisms in which the budget work and the proximity that it works, or the closeness that it works to our own budgets. And that's what a lot of this is about. That being said, I will give New South Wales credit, the Liberal Party, that they've done pretty well in the last couple of years. This budget is not terrible. It's a big spending budget. It's definitely a budget which, in my opinion, underpins what they've done for the last 2 years, which is spend a lot of money. And the only way they can spend that money is either selling assets, printing it, borrowing it, all the same ways and mechanisms in which you get it. One of the key things that they've highlighted repeatedly is a $112.7 billion record infrastructure program. So to your credit, Nathan, back in 2019 or 2020 when we did that budget, you said that you'll see infrastructure rain down from the sky, right?
We actually said it back in 2018, the mentoring program for the raw and uncut mentoring program. They would, when we go through a recession, they're just going to keep printing their way through to oblivion, and it's giving. It was basically communism. They're just printing money and saying, "Here, fix my tap, fix this, whatever," just to make jobs happen.
Yeah, so it does feel like one of those budgets, and again, the budget overview in itself is a little bit salesy in the sense that they tell us what they've done. But let's go into it. So with an education focus, we've got, some winners focus. We've got education, women in workforce, childcare operators, first home buyers get now a potential land tax choice between potential purchasing choice between land tax and stamp duty. Families, cost of living relief. Western Sydney, where you've been investing in for a long time, has had some amazing amount of infrastructure spend placed towards it. And I use some infrastructure in a very coy way. It's actually a mega amount of infrastructure.
It's funny, number 2 and 3, right?
Number 2 and 3, yes.
Women in workforce and childcare operators. It's like, well, we're going to force everyone because they can't afford to pay for the lifestyle. The wife has to go to work, and now we have to send the kids off to a childcare centre. So let's stimulate the economy by putting rebates to childcare centres, and then the women can go to work. And we've got 2 people now paying mortgages and bills.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there is a gap in terms of participation with women in the workforce, which the New South Wales budget and the current Premier is looking to ensure that they don't leave that sector of the community forgotten, like what happened in the federal budget. That's a big play there.
Oh, I mean, it's a good thing too, right?
Thing,
I'm not saying it's like bad. It's more just they're like, Nathan, so women should, people turn my words around sometimes, but yeah.
No, so I mean, look, that's a big focus, and I think in terms of commitment to that part of the budget, credit where credit's due. New South Wales done a really good job. It's actually the largest part of the budget, which tackles, I guess, workplace reinforcement in terms of hiring, skilling, upskilling, ensuring safety for women and whatnot within the workplace, and in any sort of domestic violence situations. It's really good. We'll go through it in a bit. Childcare operators. So childcare operators, any of those of our clients looking to do businesses, childcares have a couple of niche little places within the law. So if you have a childcare centre on a block of land, land tax is exempt. So it's a pretty interesting one. And obviously they're looking at expanding the childcare offering across New South Wales quite aggressively, in the sense that they're actually giving grants, funds for childcare operators, existing or new, to create places, and a certain amount of places need to be created in New South Wales. And it's probably something that, again, you touched on, Nathan, way back when, in terms of how we should look at, or how clients should look at, the way in which sustainability for our economy is going to come in the future. Now, your premise has always been there's more people is needed. You're going to have more people come in through into our state. And obviously, this is New South Wales focused. The other budgets, we can certainly do updates when they come through. And not all of our clients are in New South Wales, but New South Wales being, quite a large intake of migrants every year, or newcomers to Australia every year. For me, this budget is really looking at saying, okay, we think that there's going to be some big changes in terms of our migration policies coming through. The infrastructure spend, where they're spending it, how they're spending it, hospitals, schools, women in workforce, childcare. For me, it's just a bigger New South Wales. Right? Yeah, that's what it looks like. So I think if everyone looks at that within their own investing purview, it's a positive, right? And there's no negatives out of it. There are some losers in this budget, and maybe you can expand on this, but renters have been highlighted as a loser as part of the budget. There's no mechanism for cost of living decreases which affect renters and the rent that they pay individually. There's been no offering in that regard there.
Imagine if they had a rent keeper. You've got the job keeper, right? You've got job maker, you've got all these job things, right? Imagine if in the future there has to be food stamps, basically, like Centrelink for rent, right? A credit where you go to rent, and then the tenants have to have support because the rents rise too high. It'd be an interesting thing. As the cost goes up, we look at losers being renters. Being a renter in a property, I've noticed, doesn't matter what part of the world, right? Like, we're exposed with properties all throughout the country. We're probably a big, person, like group of company that push the rents up, right? Like, we've got, most owners have got like an extra $100 a week in the last year on their properties. So if you're the tenant on the other side of that, you're naturally paying more. If people can't afford to buy properties, right? Because interest rates going up, their serviceability coming down, people becoming more fearful. People are like, I'll just go and rent for the time being, I'll just go and rent. But there's not enough properties in the rental pool out there, meaning that the rents are now starting to experience the same sort of hyperinflation pressures that, sales prices have and all that sort of stuff. So I'm very optimistic. Like, I actually did a debate on Facebook Live yesterday or the week before. I was like, if I just put 100 my rents up in the last year, which I probably would have, by $100, that's 10 grand a week, 500 grand a year.
Yeah.
Interest rates can go up 1%, 2%, whatever. It's still not going to chase me and catch me for my rents that have gone up. And that's
I mean, everyone knows that rents are positively correlated to interest rates. However, the way in which rents are going to go up and be impactful to cost of living, I think is going to be the telling factor. So Phil Blow actually went on TV ABC and tried to, I guess, clarify the position of the RBA with regard to how they factor in the interest rates and the current cost of living. Yeah. So he was very clear about it, that the rates will go up. He's very clear that they expect that in the back end of next year, that supply chain constraints and the inflationary pressures that we're sort of seeing now will ease, and so that they have a mechanism in which they can then monitor what's happening to both wages and the way in which the economy is flowing, right? So it's not to say that they'll cut rates, or he's not saying that in any way, shape or form, but he's certainly not saying, hey, everyone, get used to 7% again, right? Yeah. So I think there is an element of jaw burning that he has to do to be able to ensure that what they're trying to do with the interest rate mechanisms actually work, right? So a really big part of what governments do is called jaw burning. They basically talk about it, goes into the media a lot. They coax people into understanding what they're trying to, you would call fear reporting or fake news, but they try and coax people into saying, okay, well, is the economy worse, better? Are things getting more expensive? Yeah. So suddenly you're seeing, prices of broccoli go to $18 on this front page news. Why? Because they're trying to get that messaging out there that, hey, things are more expensive, cost of living is going up, everyone needs to strap in, right? And that way they can then start to edge up that interest rate without having too many budgetary shocks to personal, family, households. However, I think what you will find is that the rate of inflation that we're seeing, I think, is going to be something really hard to contain. So I was using an analogy to a client the other day. You have a rock which is holding back water, right? That rock springs a leak, then it's only a matter of time before the rock comes away. They've moved the rock a little bit with interest rates, and it's really hard to push back against that water to do it. You've actually got to get to the other side of the wall, build a mini dam to put that rock back, right? So I think the way in which the water is going to start streaming out is going to be like a really burst pipe, right? It's going to be really hard to stop. You got to turn it off at the mains, and I think it's really going to be telling what happens in our upcoming federal budget next May. But I think this budget being a prelude, you'll see a lot more spending going on, and you'll see those big deficits come through.
As you said that, right? I thought of a different analogy.
Sure.
Yeah. I just thought of, imagine if you had a tsunami, right? Everyone's like, oh, where'd the beach go, right? A tsunami doesn't come in and just wipe people out, right? So my understanding, and I'm no expert in tsunamis whatsoever, right? But just in my peasant layman sort of observing of it, right? What my belief of it is that a tsunami doesn't just go, okay, the wave and then everything blows over. What happens is that the water gets sucked out to the ocean and then it comes crashing in, right? So we've got the market, which they're trying to suck out the liquidity from the market, right? They're sucking all the liquidity out that's been made, but the economy lives on fake money, right? On just dollars that have been printed. Like, we're looking here at $11.3 billion in deficit, and we're thinking that's okay, right? In a single year, that's okay, right? 11.3 billion in deficit. Let's just go back to the 90s with the recession that we had to have. There was a 94 or $96 billion deficit over the Hawke and Keating government, right? Everyone hated Labor. They were the federal government had created, so much debt. It was like we're heading our way up there in the first year of this, right? So they can try and stop this inflation by doing quantitative tightening and changing of monetary policy, but they're going to try and take this market out. But what's going to happen is it's going to come crashing back in as they have to do a flood of new currency to stop whatever's going to happen now. The bigger the problem that we see today, the more amazing it's going to be for the story that I've talked about with the inflation, the hyperinflation, everything getting wiped out. And it's by no means going to be exciting for people. Like 99% of people are going to get screwed in this, and there's things that you can do to protect yourself. I send you every day, like cauliflower, broccoli, $20 a fucking kilo for broccoli, $13 for tomatoes, Truss tomatoes. They're like $3, $4 last year. The lettuces at $12, right? Families don't have salad. They're going to be forced to eating shit food, right? Like KFC, you can't even get a fucking lettuce on the burger, right? So how is this going to end for the average people, right? Like I've talked about having your own food source, having your own water source, having your own power, having access to going off grid, all those things that are important. But the tsunami that comes through of debt, right? If you have debt, everything gets wiped out, right? The only things that still stand are your assets, your physical assets. Doesn't matter if it's property, doesn't matter if it's crypto, doesn't matter if it's gold or silver or whatever. And I think it's evident on all the markets that are out there. We're seeing crypto crash, we're seeing stock markets crash, we're seeing property markets. Property markets are faring up pretty decent at the moment. Like I did a talk last night about that property in Bella Vista that sold for a record price for a block of land, right? 2.83,
yeah.
Record sale. All right, there's inconsistencies, but there's a lot of people that are fearful. There's less people out in open homes. Some markets are going crazy, like whether it be southeast Queensland, far north Queensland, other regions, acreages. So there's some markets that are still very hot, but we're seeing, like, no doubtably, if people in 6 months' time, 12 months' time get scared, there's going to be that period. Like we look at February 2020, there was a 6-month period where people were so fucking scared. They were selling their properties, dropping them, like, oh, I'll give it to you. Just give me the money now. I'll settle it for 100 grand less. And it's like,
some of that did really well. I'll tell you right now.
The property still existed, right? The only thing that's different is the transfer of that asset went from weak hands to strong hands, right? And that's the market that we're seeing now. I'd rather have this market hands down over any other market, because you've got the power and you've got the control and you've got the ability to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there. But I do think that tsunami, with, like, yes, you can push the rock back, you need to build a new wall, but ultimately we need all that fucking water to drain out, right? We need the system to bleed out. We need, if there was to be a real right thing to happen, it would mean that all the bankrupted companies go bankrupt, that all the people go bankrupt, and value goes back to where it should have been, right? But it's not. They're just going to continue of this monetary printing. So we're seeing, like, the governments are in so much debt. Imagine in 2 years' time when they have to renew their debt, their bonds that they've got, and the bonds are now triple, quadruple what they paid. The government's going to be bleeding cash flow. That's the exciting part. That's where I think the tsunami will come in, and it's inevitable for 12 months, 24 months.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to have a two-speed or counter-cyclical event going on. So where you're asking people to tighten up, at the same time, the government's spending like crazy, right? These infrastructure projects that they've got, they're underpinned by creating more jobs or getting more efficient employment or more competitive employment arrangements, such that people get more money with the ultimate will to spend it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what you see in what's happening in these budgets is the seeds on which they're going to ultimately flood the market with liquidity in one way, shape, or form, directly or indirectly. And we've been talking about it for a while. Modern monetary theory says that, when things go pear-shaped, the government steps in. It's given a fancy new name, modern monetary theory, where the government picks up slack in the economy to be able to drive what is otherwise slow grow wages to more competitive rates, right? And I think a lot of that is happening under the guise of these infrastructure projects. Not bad nor good. but it puts a lot of pressure on businesses, right? Because now Nathan's business, which has a hoteling arm, if you need concrete, if you need tiling, if you need any sort of physical building or your own infrastructure to be built out, you're now competing with XYZ jobs, which are paying $1,800 a day, for example. So it becomes a little two-speed thing. Now, if Nathan's business can't cope with those wages, what happens? You start to slide. People start to get let go. Then they all get sucked into the government pool. So Centrelink, all the other different social welfare programs.
And I'm still excited by that too, because that in itself brings opportunities, right?
Yeah,
how many more buildings can we get? How many more? That's the opportunity.
So one of the big things I actually wrote, I was looking for it before, sorry to be looking away from the camera, but so New South Wales government is committed to maintaining sustainable debt levels over the medium term. The 2022 to 2023 New South Wales budget projects a stabilisation, so you've got to listen to the language pretty well, is stabilisation of net debt at about 14% of gross state product, or what would be otherwise the total state activity, by June 2026. That's 4 years away, and the debt is currently at 10%. They expect it to increase to 14% and stabilise there, and then they wrote, followed by a gradual decline towards the end of the decade.
So if you think about,
sorry, go on.
I just had a thought about it. So is that debt that they haven't obtained yet?
That's debt they haven't written in terms of their next budgets.
So if that is the case, that would mean that, let's say that we've got 10 basis points as a RBA rate, and it goes up to 400 basis points to 4%. Let's just say that the interest rate goes to 4%. That means the government's now paying 40 times the amount of debt that they were when they wrote this policy.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how
40 times more.
Because if you look at what they're going to do, which is extinguish some of that debt next year, that means they're going to then onboard new debt,
which will be more expensive.
Either more expensive, or you've got to find more programs for more infrastructure, more relief funds that you've got to then keep building out. So I actually wrote, and Nathan can see it here, I was bullet pointing some of the parts, and you can tell everyone what I wrote. We'll get to it.
It's like, just how you find it. Like, do you find it boring that you have to read so much shit in your day? Like,
I don't mind it, to be honest with you.
Really? Okay. Show me what it is.
What did I write?
Investing.
So what's the government doing? Ultimately, it's just investing the same way that you and I do. The way a lot of naysayers and a lot of people who are anti-property, anti-investing, anti-shares, sitting cash. Again, we don't give financial advice, but as Nathan said, a large part of my job isn't just to do the numbers. It's actually understand people's journeys, understand where they want to go to. A lot of clients, need that feedback. And if it weren't for the hours in the day and having family, we'd be, love to be talking to clients all day long. But everyone's got the same aim, which is really to deleverage or to decouple themselves out of work and to have an element of passive income. And I just don't see how you do without investing. So if you're looking at 2022 to be what they're calling now, if you see the media, a woeful year to invest, or prices have come off 9% already, et cetera. What if rates go to 6%? For the government themselves is investing.
I had the opportunity to do an interview the other week, right? And the people that interviewed me it was news.com, and I told them, what's going to happen. They said, what's going to happen with interest rates? Can we give you on it? I said, my view. And I said what had happened with exactly everything previously, right? I made sure that they documented that. And I said, look, this is only going to last 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. It's going to turn to shit. We're going to see hyperinflation, we're going to see crash of the currency, all that sort of stuff. And my mate, he goes to me, look, Nathan, that sounds all great. After about 45 minutes, he goes, I can't publish this. Maybe this is something good for a B.Invested blog on your Facebook page, right? And I was like, you're fucking kidding me, right? They can't even publish this shit, right? They can't even publish it because it's not even in the rhetoric of what they want. And I'm no good to the media. I used to be on the media all the time, but I'm no good to it because I'm telling them stuff that's against the story that they have to tell, right? And we look at this propaganda that's going out there, and it changes people's belief systems, right? Like, oh, it's going to be a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It's like, what are these people's credentials, right? They've never run a business. They've never invested in their life. They're on 50 grand a year. They're giving all these theories and stuff like that. It's like, how can they have a control of their lives? That's the problem with government. So.
Yeah, look, and you're not wrong, and it's always important who you get advice from. We don't profess to have every single answer in the world, but I think we've worked with enough clients over the years to see a lot of the permutations and combinations of how to make it work. Yeah, for sure.
I realised that when I was in the media so much that all the bullshit that I see now, I'm thinking, okay, if I know everything about the finance sector and all these people are wrong, right, that they're saying, all these crazy shit that they're dribbling, if that's just in what I know and I spend my whole life's purpose trying to understand, how many things could be wrong with geopolitical, health, military, weather, right? And you start looking at it, it's like the whole thing is scary.
Yeah, look, I mean, he loves those descriptive words.
Red's very conservative. So let's go on to these last two here before we go to the next slide. Cost of power, I've covered that a lot with everyone in the community, but you know, we look at coal prices, they're like $100. At the trading price, like $400. The reality is they have to pay $900 a ton for coal, right? So the cost of the power plants to run, we had the chat the other day about power companies chasing for power bills and all that sort of stuff. You know, we're going to start seeing like blackouts because they'll just disconnect people's power basically. That's how it feels that they'll do. I'm waiting for the day that someone tries to disconnect the power.
Well, it's common in third world countries and in developing countries where they do what's called load shedding.
Yeah.
Right. So where they basically spread out the grid load so that certain places get it, which was what we were heading for a couple of Fridays ago before the I forgot what their name is. AMIO stepped in and basically said, okay, hang on, we'll pay the coal guys whatever they want to pay. We'll pay you guys whatever you want to pay to keep the power on.
But if you think about it, whatever that gap is, right? If that's $500 spread, right? What is that $500 spread? If it's like $900 and they're capping it at $300, so that spread that they have to pay, who is funding that, right? You've got to think about it. Who's funding for the coal to come out of the ground? Who's funding for these mining rights to come? Who's funding all of these things? And you go, who's taking all that debt, right?
Ultimately,
it's inflation, right? It's a new time bomb. It's a new derivative that's being created there. And I've talked about a lot on the Facebook Lives. You know, when you start seeing the cost of diesel go up to $2.50 a litre, a truck that used to be able to deliver the groceries to Woolworths now has to charge double because the cost has doubled. So the cost of delivery is doubled. And then when you go and put the microwave meals in the fridge and they have to put them in the fridge with the orange juice and shit, and then the lights and the refrigeration has sorry, just popping up on the screen. Then the cost of electricity doubles, triples, quadruples. Then who's going to foot the bill for that? They're going to have to put their price up, which then causes more inflation. It's an endless cycle. If we look at Turkey, I think they actually pushed the interest rates up to 60%, right? But it's 60% before, right? But their currency is completely screwed. It's not like Australian currency and those other country currencies. But the next phase, like when we go through the hyperinflation, which will be when they start printing money, it's just going to run away. We will get to a point where they will want to put up the interest rates to 60%, but it'll be like when a Big Mac meal is, $5,000 for a Big Mac meal, and average wage is.
I think in Turkey, cost of basic living went up like 80% year on year.
Yeah.
Right. So that's like just your basic living.
That's what they report, right? They're saying it went up by 5.8 a year, right? And we know that our petrol's doubled and all the shit's doubled. So imagine how bad it is.
Yeah.
In those sort of situations. So.
Health, I put down as a loser. It wasn't necessarily reported by all the commentators as losers, but I thought there's been a lot of money spent on health, like a really significant amount of money, which is good in terms of access to healthcare. But what it does mean is that we've got a situation where that health cost is going to be borne in future generations, right? So there's no real mechanism or means in which they're trying to say, okay, let's get preventative healthcare in place. And obviously that's part of the local hospitals and doctors and how they work it. But the amount of money that's spent on health in this country is fantastic for us because we live there, but I'm not sure it's sustainable long term, right? So I think what we'll end up having is we will end up having things like bulk billing on the chopping block in a few years' time. The gap will be introduced. You'll have a lot more private hospitals. You'll have a lot of different ways in which now these measures here are going to catch up with additional cost of living mechanism spends in the future. I think health is going to be one of the biggest sufferers of that. I think that there's a way in which they can potentially make healthcare free forever. However, the way in which it's run now in terms of bureaucracy and the amount of money that's spent just delivering health projects without necessarily getting the health outcomes right is pretty staggering. So when we go through it, you'll see that there's hospitals being built left, right, and centre. There's clinics, there's mental health care clinics, and everything like that. But I don't see that being free for it. So I think it's going to be one of the losers.
Especially all the new things that need to be covered in healthcare, like heart centres and blood clots and all those sorts of things. Moving on to the next one. We spent like 30 minutes on one slide, Red.
That's good. That's all right.
A lot of time on here, right?
We can always talk.
Who knows that you could make such boring shit exciting, and we've got people watching and not leaving. So that's good.
That's good. All right. So the big one. So interestingly enough, both ABC and I think Nine did a poll on what the most receptive parts of this budget, which was released about 24 hours ago, I should say, was. I expected stamp duty and land tax to be the most important factor. Oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, it's maybe because I'm not with it enough. It wasn't. It was about fourth on the rung.
Yeah.
So there was childcare, I think, first, and then a few others, including some of the health spend as well, and then land tax and stamp duty, and all the way down to number 4. So that indicated to me is that some of the media that we've been reading about how big a problem or issue this all is may not be the exact same issues and problems that people who are actually reading the news are suffering, right? So I thought it's a big one. I thought obviously as an economic instrument that they are looking at trying to implement, they shortchanged everyone because they only went to first-home buyers. Because you and me have to pay stamp duty, and you, me, and all the other people who invest have to pay stamp duty and land tax on investment properties, right? So this is really aimed at first-home buyers who are deciding to, I guess, up their spend potentially, or look at trying to just have one big bill and then being done with it.
I have a different thought on it. I touched on it last night.
Go for it.
But we'll go into it a bit further today. Where do we start, right? Basically, I was very surprised that Peritop put this out, right? The Premier of New South Wales put out this the stamp duty removal and also the shared equity scheme.
Yeah.
So when you add those two things together, so the biggest things to get in a property, let's say the average property price in Sydney is $1 million, right? Let's say someone goes, whatever. They go and buy property for $1 million. How much will it cost them? They'll need to put down a 20% deposit, so 200 grand, and say 40K, 50K for stamp duty, legal fees, all that sort of shit. So 250K.
Yeah. People
don't have 250K. They have to, maybe put down a 10% deposit. So put down 100 grand plus 50 grand and do it for 150 grand. They might put down a 5%, which is the smallest deposit. 5% deposit is 50K plus 50K, 100K. 100 grand is the entry level into the market. Now, people don't have any money.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone's fucked. Right? They don't own their car. They don't own their house. Right? Everyone, like, the system's built up, right? People don't just have cash sitting around everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So if you think
they got a lot of free money in the last 2 years.
Oh, lots of free money out there. And all the crypto bros out there that's gone to the moon because they got some Bitcoin or whatever, is also, a lot of people have got access to liquidity like that. But then when we look at it now and go, well, you don't have to pay stamp duty, right? And if you combine that with the fact that you can do the shared equity scheme, right?
Just to give you the numbers, that together is a $1.5 billion incentive.
That's for the year,
yeah.
Right? So what about next year, the year after, the year after, the year after, right? Because when they put these things in place, they don't take it away. I still pay GST, I still pay land tax after that was meant to go 100 years ago because people with royalty were taking over. So then we look at it of this thing occurring and snowballing. This is a beta testing here, right? I thought when I heard it that it was the Labor sleazy bloke. He was the guy who put out that. Like initially I said, oh yeah, I know he put that out. Then I had to reread it again. And I was like, hang on a second, this is the New South Wales government. So the New South Wales government has introduced the 40% co-ownership. So basically the government owns 40%, you own 60%. So if you're going in to buy a property today for $1 million, you put down 600 grand, the government buys 400 grand, it goes to $2 million, they sell off, they take the 800 grand and all that. So two things occur there in my mind. One, the government's creating a derivative of a Ponzi scheme that they've already created, and they're jumping into that with borrowed money because they know they're going to create a bigger Ponzi scheme to be able to offload that and create future cash flow for themselves, right?
So to reinterpret that is that the government won't lose money on that property. They've got to keep the properties going up.
They've got to keep the properties going up. And that's where they're going to try and get their money back out, right? So you can get in for a 2% deposit, but you've only got this going to 3,000 people, which is, certain parts of 3,000. It's the frontline workers, doctors,
up to 6,000 single parents, older singles, first-time buyers who are teachers and police and nurses.
So now what about if Sleazy comes in and he gives the federal one, right? And he goes, well, we've got another 10,000 each, so we've got 50,000 people that can have it. So suddenly we've got these stamp duty, legal, all these different things that are going around. There's all of these special schemes that are going on. So remembering that if you had to put down a 20% deposit and a 5% stamp duty, legal fees, whatever, you need about $250K on $1 million property. If you hocked yourself to the hill and got a 5% deposit, stamp duty, you'd be paying 100 grand in the worst case, the best case scenario. So if you've got now a $1 million property and you just put down 2% of 600 grand, that's $12,000 deposit, and you opt to take the stamp duty over your life until you're sold with it, well then you only have to pay $12,000 and you're getting into a property, right? So then at that point, what's the barrier of entry? Everybody will be buying a property and it will create this Ponzi scheme to get even bigger, right? So my view on it is it's dog shit wrapped in cat shit, right? And sprinkles are put on top. But the reality is that I'm all for it, right? Because the Johnny come laters are going to be having to buy into this because the prices are just rising so high. It's the only way they've got to jump on the ladder. So owning the asset, naturally all these people later on, they're going to be the suckers that come in. They're going to be pushing the value of your assets up, which is what's happened over decade after decade after generation after generation. And as our economic system implodes, people are going to have less and less to their name. And I think it's great if you have assets. If you don't have assets, then you're pretty fucked. So in my view, I think that it's great, right? Bring it on. Push that Ponzi up higher than we can, right? Print more debt, get everyone enslaved, get everyone pushed into it, and all of our assets are going to go up. But that's because I've got the assets. If you're a first home buyer or if you're someone just starting out, or it becomes tougher. So the moral of the story is that you need the assets because they're putting all these packages around to inflate that Ponzi scheme even bigger.
Yeah, look, so I think
my view.
There's some points that you touched on which certainly ring true with regard to house prices.
Yeah.
It may not necessarily help house prices for those who are looking to get in as first home buyers. But purely for the fact that if you've got to pay less stamp duty, sellers will be motivated by that as well, and so they'll ask for a little bit more, right? A couple of things that some of the commentators have said is that one, this will probably be expanded across all property types with regard to investors and otherwise, and they'll probably just have a surcharge applied to investors, for example, if it's not your own home. But the question, or the key question in terms of does it really help? Because if you look at the median house price in Sydney, yes, it is high. But now the developing suburbs, and I know from some friends who work in and around in Treasury.
The leasehold land?
Not the leasehold land, in terms of where they're actually expanding Sydney to. In some instances, it may be quicker for you to get from Mount Druitt to the city to a Western Sydney suburb back to Mount Druitt.
Yeah.
It's going that far, sort of southwest, right? So way past Menangle Park, or way past Campbelltown. It's going crazy, like really far out. So I think in terms of how they view the overall property market, in terms of how they view the centrality of Sydney and New South Wales in and of itself, I'm not sure it's planned out that well, right? We still have density issues. We have a lot of different things. Now, this is a really big boon for apartment owners, right? Because the average rate of an apartment, how much would the average rate of an apartment cost? 700, 650?
If you're talking to me,
in
in
Sydney.
Sydney, between 250 and 400,000 in Sydney, and I mean 400,000 would get you in Parramatta or something, but ideally 300,000 in Sydney would be what I'd be wanting to play it.
Yeah,
and it's still available.
But what's the median?
I don't know. Look at that shit. It's too high for what I want to buy.
Call it half set of housing. So call it
It's about like
600,000.
maybe like 700 or something.
The land tax component on an apartment is very, very low.
Small.
Right? So that means that your land tax, in terms of how they actually value that from a property point of view, will mean that your entry point from a stamp duty perspective on apartments is nil. Right? So what will it promote? It will promote people to get into apartments, right?
Yeah.
Because you go, okay, well, I'm actually not paying any long-term land tax. So people aren't silly. They'll actually do the math and they'll say, okay, well, I'll get a 3-bedroom apartment. What does that mean?
But is it
That
3%
means
of the land value or 3% of the purchase? 0.3%
land value.
That's the other thing, right? That's the other thing that's very weird, right? Like, why I would not take that bullet would be if you're paying 3% of the purchase price, let's just say it's 3% and now it's 0.3%, so you're paying it over 10 years. If I was flipping a property, if I was getting into it for like 2 years or something, getting rid of the thing, I'm like, who gives a shit? It's not a long-term thing. But I'm playing the long game, right? Like as an investor, are you playing a 5-year or 2-year or 10-year or 20-year or 50-year intergenerational? So there'll be a point where everybody starts doing this stuff. They'll be getting more regular upfront cash flow streams coming in from the consumer that's coming in to play at the table, and they will be getting less and less for that. But as an investor, I want to be like, you won't be able to sit there and go, oh, I'll just pay it up front and I'll be giving my kids, my grandkids, great grandkids. It won't be, it will be a thing of the past. But yeah, that's a very interesting point that you made about the land tax on unit complex, because a lot of people have a misconception that houses are better than units.
It's a complaint. You get a lot.
Yeah, people say it. And I started off my journey getting to about 7 or 8 properties and houses, sorry. And I don't even use the word house. You never hear me say house. I always say property, because I realized when I got to number 7 or 8 that I was screwed and I needed to buy townhouses, units, and villas because that's how the numbers stacked up. And then I saw it. I was like, this is heaps better, right? If you're buying a house, you have to pay land tax, you have to pay building insurance, you have to pay all these different things. You have to pay in a unit, you have to pay strata levies, but you don't have to pay building insurance, you don't have to pay all these other things. And when you stack up 3 units or 4 units that you can buy versus one house, you're like, wow, I'm getting like 10 times the amount of revenue and gross profit. So, having a strategy, units are not bad. Units are very good. So my portfolio went from 100% houses to about 70% units, and now I think they're like 30%. And I've got like other things like the motels and shopping centres.
You got a lot of land.
You got a lot of land. And if that thing happens, right, it's like, wow, how's that going to work in the future, right?
Yeah, so they decide to open this up to all landowners and all purchasers, then I think it's going to be an interesting time for us as accountants, and also for your advisories and different bodies who are helping you purchase and whatnot, including Nathan. It's going to be something that we have to factor in, right? So it's interesting to see that this conversation has started. I didn't think it would happen this quickly, to be honest with you, and I know definitely from within Treasury, if Dominic Perrottet wasn't actually the treasurer, it wouldn't have been brought front and center. So I think because it's one of the landmark things that he was wanting to do whilst he was treasurer. So I think there is some stability in the fact that this will probably stay and probably continue and expand over time. For the government, it becomes an annual recurring revenue, right? So
that's it.
Yeah, and so that recurring revenue is important for them to say, okay, well, no matter what happens next year, our budget's going to be topped up by A, B, C, and D. Because at the moment, the stamp duty helps, and it's I think it's got $728 million to introduce the option for first-home buyers purchasing a home up to $1.5 million. So effectively, that is what they're losing. So they're crediting it back to the budget, saying that's what they're giving up. So it's one of those things where once they get the overall momentum in having everyone on this land tax, homeowners and whatnot, because at the moment first-home owners don't pay anything, it's going to be a big game changer for them, right? And I think what you are going to see is that there's going to be a big push by developers and obviously lobbyists to try and get density changes inside of Sydney so that they can build more and more apartments so that you're not paying these big land tax amounts. So it could be the cusp of a really big infrastructure rollout. It might be 10 years away, 20 years away, but you just have to see it to understand. And I think that's where they're going with it. So I don't profess to be a property expert, that's Nathan, but if you read in between the lines of the budget overview, I do believe that they feel like this is going to be the long-term income stream which they can rely on, just like normal taxes for the government, right?
I actually had a thought just then. Imagine being the government, right? That'd be really cool just in itself, because you could just fucking create all this fraud and rob people and all that sort of stuff, right? I imagine having that as a fucking tools to you think you just print out and go, oh, we'll just print some of this out, right? But then imagine you have a property market. Let's say that you're getting 3% per year of average land value. If you need to cook your books, right, you need to push your income up. All you do is cook the books and push the house prices up, and everyone's now being cooked to have a, pay you more revenue. It's an ingenious plan, right? Because then they're getting more revenue on a regular basis. They need to fix up a few of their mistakes they made. Oh, well, we'll just create a little property bubble. Everyone has more capital. They can go and use their house as an ATM, go and pull out money, go on holiday, buy themselves a new car, buy new furniture, upgrade the wife, whatever they're trying to do. And they just turn it into an ATM. There's a whole financial system is based on property.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that people don't realise is that it's 3% of your, 0.3% of your current land value as at that year. And obviously, as we know, with investors, the value of general comes in each year, does a valuation of all the lands. And if you look, anyone has property in the last 3 or 4 years, really, there's been a really wild swing. So they went up, they went down, they went up, and they went down again because a lot of people complained and reversed a lot of the value of general's assessments, because some of them were just, to be honest with you, ludicrous. So it's one of those things where you need to understand that, to Nathan's point, is that they're looking down this as a 100-year, 50-year sort of annuity they're going to create in terms of income. So what it does for the long-term view, I'm to be honest, I'm not 100% sold. Initially, I was thinking, well, this is fantastic because it means people can access properties a little bit cheaper. But the stamp duty is a very prohibitive tax. It's a big prohibitive tax for movement as well. So this is considered a mover's tax as well. So you want the land holdings of those who own properties, so the baby boomers and those people who are a little bit more on the older side, you want them to downsize. But one big reason they don't downsize is they don't want to have to lose a lung doing it. So this basically incentivizes both downsizers and purchasers. So it's one of those things where you might be in a position where it doesn't help house prices long term, but initially it will get a lot of people sort of, I guess, inquisitive about property, which is where a lot of our clients are in, so it's good. One thing I did want to touch on is that if they do start to tax people, and this, I think this is coming in January or February, if January and February was to occur, you'll find that your land tax assessment will be in line with everyone else's, which is 31st of December, is when they actually make their land tax assessment. For any clients who've got current land tax assessments from last December, which they're not happy with, you can challenge that. We don't necessarily promote it because it can be a futile exercise. However, land tax is one of the few taxes which is tax deductible for investors. So you'll be in a position where it's not as bad for you. But it will be really interesting to see what the FY22 value of general assessments are.
A bunch of thugs and crooks. Anyone that's trying to, they make Ned Kelly look like a good bloke, right? So that's how bad it is. Anyway.
Before we get onto this, I wanted to go through a couple of different things which might be pertinent to you. Is that there's about $1.3 billion which is being invested in regional activities and regional areas. So obviously a lot of your hotels and motels are in those areas. You've been talking about that for some time. So you've got $250 million a year for Stronger Communities Fund, $230 million a year to support tourism development. You've got $220 million a year over 3 years to expand resources for regions programs, exporting ongoing prosperity of mining communities, improving economic communities, local amenities, creating positive social outcomes. $175 million economic activation, providing investment to existing key regional industries in regional New South Wales. So this will be replicated by virtually all the states.
Can we go hit them up for grants?
I can give it a go.
Here's another thing, right? This has got nothing to do with property investing. Some of you guys have businesses. I can see the names popping up. I can see Jono just wrote in there. And I actually said to Jono the other day, make sure you go on a claim for a grant. He told me I've got a fucking grant, right? The one that you employed for me for the big one. He's got the smaller version of it, right?
Okay.
And I was like, everybody that has a business, if you have a business, there is money that they are throwing at you. If you think that a Centrelink recipient in Mount Druitt getting $300 a week is like, oh, my tax money's going over there, don't worry about the Mount Druitt guy that's on $300 a week worth of Centrelink. There is Centrelink for the rich, right? There is literally support packages that is like free money from the government. They want you to take and say, please take it and create new jobs. The reason why there's all these lack of jobs is because they've got people sign up to like education programs and JobKeeper programs and studying programs and stuff like that. They want to pay for people to be babysat throughout the day and, for the opportunity. If you have a business, then there is literally thousands and thousands of different grants.
Yeah, look, there's even one which is called a fees and rebate grant. So if you paid council rates for your business, if you've paid FBOS fees, if you've paid a whole bunch of different things that you can claim up to, I think, $1,500 to $3,000, depending on what you've paid per business. So there's a lot of different things. Nathan's right. Reach out to us. If you need any help, we can certainly get involved and try and help you. Obviously, it's generally aimed at businesses who have suffered during the last couple of years. So if your business has gone really well, then credit to you.
Suffered in some way, shape, or form, really.
But if you have and you've got those different complexities coming up in your business and your life cycle, and I suspect they're going to keep them alive for a little bit longer because there is a reasonable amount of uncertainty with regard to the overall economic condition. Although if you read the budget, everyone's quite buoyant and optimistic about the economy. I'm not so much, to be honest with you. I think the COVID tail and the pandemic is going to wag a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a little bit of a rocky road for the next couple of years, in my opinion.
So excited, eh? I love lockdown.
Why I brought up the regional thing was is that if you find out from just a general investing perspective, is that obviously the big wins for the government are in the city. It's where most of the votes are. It's where most people actually do. But the fact they're investing such a significant amount in regional areas within New South Wales, look, it's one of those things where they see that's where the future is. So a lot of people, a lot of clients always say, well, where should I invest? We always obviously discuss with Nathan and send them back to Nathan. But some people have issues in the fact that you may have recommended certain areas before and whatnot. So it's always for me, a bit of a boon to see, that they are actually investing in these areas, and it's not just token amounts; it's pretty significant amounts over the next couple of years. So it's always good to understand what different competing asset classes you can also get into. Our clients often ask us, where would you invest? We don't give that advice, but you'll be in a position where, and not everything which is around the corner is the most perfect investment. It could be a little bit far away from you.
I just noticed that Adam wrote, "Hi guys, awesome content. I joined late. Will this be available on YouTube channel, Nath?" This will not be available on YouTube. However, for those of you that have registered for it, you do get access to it like a day later or something like that. But it's not live, so we can't be interactive and stuff like that. So, but yeah, like you do have to register each of these every month. It's generally the first Wednesday of every month. This month we pushed it back a little bit because Ridwan's been busy. I don't even know why, but some reason like we had to push it back. But yeah, generally the first Wednesday of every month. So yeah. So yeah, back on this one, Red. So we've got
so we sort of crossed over the budget. There are a lot of budget outcomes that we can go through in terms of family savings and whatnot. The best would be to head to New South Wales budget overview, and you can read it. It's all pretty straightforward. In terms of what we can expect for tax time, which is around the corner. So in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be seeing a lot of clients and getting a lot of different queries about a lot of different places. So the part of the screen on your right is direct excerpt from the tax office. So now they've gone through a more proactive method in the last few years of saying, what are our priorities? Before you used to hear me talk about what we get through our professional bodies and TPB. Now they actually just go out and say it for probably the last 2 or 3 years. So on the left side of the screen, I actually had it a little bit more comical, but your team has tried to make me a boring accountant. I had crypto as 1, 2, and 3, and then put everything second.
Oh, really? Okay.
After that. So, it is really important this year in particular that you do understand that crypto is going to be targeted in a really, really focused way, right?
I actually had a thought of something on crypto. So this is non-taxation advice. I'm talking to you guys that are watching this, and trusty accountants in here. I've never run this past, and I will be saying something that's really out of line. Feel free to kick me under the table. He's like, fuck, like, this is going to be fun, right? Now, I noticed that crypto's dropped massively, right? And there's some people that have like done their ass, right? That have really done their ass this year, right? And the crypto's gone, ooh. If you have a cryptocurrency, let's say you had 10 grand and it's turned to 1 grand, right? If you were to sell that, right, you would lock in a loss of $9,000, right? And then go back and buy that thing the next day or the next minute or whatever.
Try not to do that, I'll tell you why, but go on.
Okay. There's no other.
Or maybe a different crypto.
A different crypto, or let's say I'm just making up shit here, right? So just don't take this for taxation advice. But let's say that we had our buddy over here, our buddy, the cup of water, right? This guy, his name's Bob, right? Bob has 10 grand of Bitcoin Bob, and then we have Edward, who likes Ethereum, right? And he has 10 grand of Ethereum, and his Ethereum tanked in the ass, and Bob's Bitcoin fell in the ass, and they've both gone down and they've lost half their money. Bitcoin Bob decided he buys Ethereum, and Ethereum Edward goes to buy some Bitcoin, right? Whatever it may be. But if you were to sell that, you would then technically have a capital loss because you've had a loss. So therefore, we've got 2 weeks, 3 weeks of no advice to anyone to do anything. But if you have a loss, well, then you might be able to offset it against some other capital gains sort of that you may have had. So if you sold something at a profit and you want to try and minimize it, you have those ability. And no one ever tries to avoid paying taxes, because we all love paying the government for the wonderful job that they do in this country, and we should be paying them as much tax as possible. But if you were to think of something like that, it would be interesting for someone to run that scenario. How would that work, Brett? That's something I thought of.
It's live advice on a live.
It's live on a live, and like you're fucking going, I can tell.
So there's so in terms of what Nathan's saying there, there's a lot of parts of that which you certainly can do. So you can lock in losses that you've anticipated that you're not going to create any future gains on, and those losses can offset future capital gains, current year capital gains. They can't be written back to prior year capital gains, for example, but you certainly can do that. Now, washing is not allowed, where you sell a crypto or you sell an asset, for example, a listed asset, and buy it back the next day, next minute, same type, same amount, same everything to do with it. So that's considered washing.
What about if I had 2 Bitcoin and I decided to sell them at a loss, right? I don't have 2 Bitcoin that I'd sell at a loss, but anyway, let's assume that I had 2 Bitcoin and I was selling them at a loss, and then I decided that under my trust, one of my trusts wanted to buy some Bitcoin and decided to buy 2 Bitcoin. Is there any problem with that?
Well, theoretically, no. Theoretically, no. Yeah, they're different entities, so theoretically, no. Obviously, common control is always an issue.
I'm not buying Bitcoin or crypto at the moment, guys. I love crypto, but I feel that it's a very liquid market, and that's where the rug pull's starting to really happen and hurt, and that's,
Yeah, look, so I think no advice intended here, but if you were to do any sort of changing of assets, shares, any sort of liquid assets like that, property obviously a lot more illiquid than those type of things, those losses that you're referring to can offset, for example, capital gains from property, right? So now is the time to consider looking at your portfolio, things that you may not get back into, things that you go, okay, well, I've had enough of this, I don't want to be bothered with it. Now in the future, if you consider that, it's an investable asset again, and you happen to buy back into it, there's not much that anyone can say. The ATO in and of themselves probably wouldn't say anything. It's where there's a clear nexus that you're trying to do is what's called washing. But if you were to lock in some losses, which I have because of BSV,
you got a very bad recommendation from someone on that, mate.
So if I've got that, then I can say, well, I don't think I'm going to buy back into that. And if I had some gains from, whatever it might be in the future, it can be offset. So, but I guess the critical part of what you want to do is make sure that your reporting is correct. Now, a lot of clients come to us, and a lot of clients are really good in crypto, and a lot of clients are really versed in it. They're talking about MetaMask, they're talking about offshore wallets, off-ramping, the whole works, right? For me, I look at it a very simple equation. Money doesn't come from nothing. So if you've taken money off into the ether and suddenly it comes back, the ATO won't care. They'll say, no problems, Ribbon. We don't know what your cost base is, so we assume it's zero, right? So be very careful in the way that you're trying to get around what would otherwise be reporting requirements with regard to crypto. Now, I've had meetings with people like Coinly, a very large platform. I know a number of people who work at desks in different crypto exchanges, and they've all had a knock on the door from the ATO saying, hey, we'd like your trading data. If you don't give it to us, we'll get it. And if you don't give it to us, even after we say we'll get it, we'll make your life very difficult, right? So a lot of
everyone's life fucking difficult as it is. So what changes does that do?
So their record keeping is really just about now interpreting that data, right? So I would be very careful for all crypto investors, especially crypto investors, and this is not to sound derogatory, who think to have a way around the system. It should be something that you carefully consider with your accountant, myself or anyone else included, that you know and understand how all your capital gains works within crypto, any sort of activity that you're getting with regard to, you know, if you're getting any sort of tokens given to you, if you're getting any sort of income, any yielding, forking and stuff is a little bit more straightforward, but you'd be in this position where a lot of that income is either capital or considered like interest income.
I just heard this once, right? I heard this once on a video for someone. It's the funniest fucking thing I've ever heard, right? And it was Jeff Berwick, right? He's a dollar vigilante, right?
Oh, yeah,
He lives in Mexico and he's very off the grid. And he goes, if you're paying tax on fucking that, you're a fucking idiot, right? Like he's very, like this guy does ayahuasca and shit on a YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Off his head. But he said something really funny one day. It always made me interested, right? Because I've never had theft happen on my crypto. But if I had $1 million of crypto and I put it on my Trezor and someone stole it due to theft, right? Would that be a tax loss because it got stolen due to theft?
So if it's not recoverable, or you're in a position where you genuinely think that there's no more chance of you to access that, then yeah, it's a loss. Sure.
Hope you all don't lose your crypto so I can keep it safe.
There's an actually interesting point there by Luke Walker. I know we're not in question and answer time, but in terms of the ATO picking up on property, you're absolutely right, Luke. So for the last 2 years, the ATO has actually deployed information matching into the rental space. So obtaining data from both real estate agents, rental companies, banks, individual person's tax returns and bank accounts to say where they're paying rent and all that type of thing, you know, matching addresses and whatnot. So there's more and more focus from the ATO to say, we would like to have a chat with you about your rental property because you're not declaring income correctly, or you're over declaring what would otherwise be personal related interest expenses, for example. So a lot of people re-gear their investment properties to pay off their home, or they re-gear their investment properties for personal use. Now they're actually getting pretty core information directly from the banks with regard to how much security is being provided over a particular asset, so they know the core loan amounts, right? So don't just what they say here is that each individual's expenses are unique to their circumstances. Don't cut and paste. Now that's in reference to work-related expenses, but it certainly applies to rental properties. So a lot of clients say to me, "Hey, everything's the same as last year. Just take it off that." Now that's nice in a perfect world, but that's not how we do it. So what you want to make sure is that from an investing objective point of view, that your rental properties aren't actually risking you, right? Risking you the ability to go forward, to be able to continue to invest in the future. And I know, you know, you have a healthy amount, a good amount of disdain for the government tax policy. However,
I'm all for paying the government, right? I just work. I walk in the step of the government, right? Like, you know, some people walk in the step of God, and I just believe that government is at that level. They should be deserve everything that we could give to them, right?
In serious note, I do know Nathan's affairs reasonably well. He likes doing things right, obviously being as efficient as possible, and I think that's the reason and part of the reason why you're able to you know, invest with a lot of certitude, right?
Well, we actually had recent incident with our friends at the ATO, and they wanted to have a chat. And
It was a good, healthy chat.
It was a good, healthy
That
chat,
was it.
right?
It was good.
And they said that we're fine, right? Like we've got hundreds of entities and hundreds of properties and lots of different transactions, and it was good, right? It was like a report check. It's like these guys are happy with the fact that we're doing. They ask us a few questions and they leave. They're going, okay, no one was speeding around here. There's no fines to give anyone, and everything's kosher. And they walked on and they go, well, let's go and pick on someone else. And they feel like a police, right? They look like the people coming out of the police. And, you know, here, pull you in for a breath test. Here's a drug test, whatever, right? That's what they want to try and do. But you keep them happy, and they turn around and they go away. And important to have all documentation, like very, very important. Like when they came to ask for information, we're able to provide it.
Yeah, right? Everything was good.
I joke about stuff very, funnily and ask silly situations. I do have a very strong distaste for them because they're trying to take my fucking money, right? And they're just, I feel like they're fucking pirates of our bank accounts, right? So there you go, it's a pirate of the bank account, right?
But Deb will be happy starring.
He's got his own pirate trying to take his shit apparently. But yeah, like it's important to have the documentation, so when they come, you go, here you go, there it is, get the fuck out, have a good life, and go and annoy someone else.
And look, in less explicit terms, it is always important to be able to respond and be in touch with the ATO when they do come for a review, if they do come for a review, in a meaningful way, right? So that way you've got everything there, and that's where we like to sort of get clients into that position. So that's not to say that we don't try and look for ways in which you can minimize your tax legally, ways in which we can say, okay, well, should you bring forward this expense? Can you be more tax efficient? That's all fine and good. But even as recently as of this week, I had to let a client know that said, look, I'm not going to be doing this for you because it's improper, right? So I think what you need to be in a position to do is to say, okay, how do you play the game? What mechanisms do you use? On a sporting field, you use every bit of it. So I'm really into F1. And we were watching the F1 across the weekend.
I didn't know that. There you go.
And they say the drivers use,
your friend's got a Lambo.
The shoulders of the actual road.
Yeah.
Where it's like the red and white strips.
Yeah.
Right. So that takes a bit of the shine off the wheels.
Yeah.
So they use that to their advantage to be able to get to the nice part of the wheel. Right.
Yeah.
So you got to use what's in front of you. The tools are in front of you. Trusts. All the other different things. What Nathan's going to be mentioning towards the end in terms of sort of preserving wealth and getting a device right. Those are things you got to use to your advantage. So crypto was number one. Builders, developers, a lot of your clients are also doing mini developments and stuff like that. So I sort of characterize all of them in that number two spot.
On builders and just what we're talking about, right? If someone's paying too much in tax, it's because they lack knowledge, right? It could be recklessness, stupidity, fear, whatever, right? I see, especially when you say builders, right? Oh, pay me in cash, right? All these motherfuckers that go, come and pay me in cash, right? I have never seen, right? Just think about this, right? Who have you ever met that gets paid in cash who is rich?
That's a fair point, yeah.
No one.
Well,
right?
Back in the day, maybe, but not now. Yeah.
Who's rich? None of them.
Vegetable guys at Flemington Market.
They're not. They're selling vegetables. Right? They're going back at 3 o'clock in the morning next week to do the same fucking tricks, right? I have a goal. I don't want to pay taxes, right? However, I grow the economy. I've got hundreds of staff. I've got all these things. I'm fucking renovating dozens of properties. Like I'm contributing to the society. So the tax game is set up for people to pay no tax or to pay little tax. But it's, if I'm paying my tax, well, I don't want to pay the tax. I want to provide services, and then other people have to pay the taxes on the money that I throw back out there. I'm increasing my wealth. So I've never seen a rich person or a wealthy person walk around and say, pay me in cash.
Yeah,
right?
No, you're right. You're not wrong there.
If you want to be wealthy, you need to understand this game. You need to understand the parameters of the table, right? And that's why I take so much interest in this, because I'm like, I'm fucking trying to earn billions of dollars, right? And I don't want these guys trying to be a pirate of my bank account, trying to take it over, right? And that's a very important thing for me. So I do things legally. I do them ethically. Like if something goes wrong, what am I going to do? Just take a little bit of cash, and then the next minute they come and try and like pull my shit apart. No, I just want them to piss off and leave me alone, and I do everything right. But I understand their game, and I'll work inside the perimeter. I think Kerry Packer said it on that video. Go look it up on YouTube. Kerry Packer with the Senate inquiry. Yeah. But we'll move on to the next slide, or we'll finish on this one. Or?
So just quickly, we'll go to number 3 is obviously property investors. So number 2, quickly, just if you're doing any developments, make sure that you come and see us about GST and capital gains tax implications. It's really, really important. Tax office is becoming really particular about it. They've engaged the likes of solicitors. Stephen and I always have conversations about what boxes to tick on the contract of sale in terms of properties, GST, whatnot. Work-related deductions going to be a huge one this year because everyone for the last couple of years has really been taking the piss in their work-related deductions, in my opinion. I shouldn't use that language, but been really.
First time I've heard you say like this. I'm like, I've loosened them up and got a word out of it, right?
It's my pet peeve, as in work-related deductions and how people view them. But be very particular in the way that you claim your work-related deductions. Everyone's been very advantageous, I should say, with the work-related deductions. Use the, in my opinion, use the set rate that they give you. In only exceptional circumstances, use the twofold rate. I think just go with what they've got, but we all understand that work-related deductions need to be reined in. So I certainly think that sole traders, guys who are working for themselves, be tax efficient. Coming up to the end of the financial year, think about contributions. Even really people who work as well on a PAYG basis. Think about self-managed, think about superannuation contributions before the end of the financial year. You're running out of time. Think about expenses under the instant asset write-off. If you're a sole trader, tradie, professional, you need to buy computers, laptops. If you use a car for work, for example, you can write all that off under the COVID provisions, and the exemptions are provided in that space. Cash, as Nathan said, is not king in some regards. With
cash is trash. Cash is fucked. It's
cash economy is really, it's actually dropped down the ladder in terms of the ATO's focus, because they've done such a focused job, not really good or bad, in terms of stamping out cash. So it's really difficult. So we've got queries where clients receive very small amounts of cash in the scheme of things, $38,000, and they get a query for, why did you get this one? They send a review question, or they send a questionnaire. So if you're receiving cash and you're banking it, or you're receiving cash and you haven't got a lifestyle to boot, but you're driving really fancy cars and living fancy houses, the ATO will come knocking.
So if you hashtag billionaire, better watch out. Cool. Let's move on to the next one, because we've got a very important slide. I noticed that, like, I remember when we started this, you're like, tax is really boring, like when, we're going to get some, like, we're going slow, we can keep everybody here all night.
The problem with me and you, we can talk for hours. So quickly, property investors, as I mentioned to you before, data matching is becoming really accurate, and don't get anyone to tell you otherwise. It is here. So make sure that everything with regard to your properties, with regard to the amounts that you're claiming, are accurate. The example I've got on the right-hand side there is further down the track, but it's really important now. So claim for initial repairs. So recently we had a conversation with the tax office. It's a very well-known thing. Initial repairs is generally not claimable. So if you're getting a property ready for rental, you can't claim it. However, there are provisions in regard to understanding what those initial repairs entail under common rental situations. For example, you can't have a new bathtub but not have taps. You can't have all these other bits and pieces without having the other complementing aspects.
So just think, right? Like, I do lots of renos, right? And I feel like, have you heard of that? It was an Eminem song, Guilty Conscience, right? And it was about where he says there's like the good guy on his shoulder and the bad guy on his shoulder, right? There's like, we've got Rid here talking from the ATO level, and you got Nathan here going, fuck this, right? But if you need to be smart about it, right? Like, if you had to repair your bathroom, and I use the word repair, right? I don't renovate anything. Like, none of my properties are renovated, right? I have lots of leaks, and you have to rip up all the tiles, and the tiles don't match, so you have to replace more tiles in the repair. A repair is acceptable, but a renovation would not be. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's depreciable, right? So you have to then wait for a longer period to be able to claim some of your money back.
So, and then if you were if you were to buy a property that was not the best state, right, and it's pretty rough, a lot of people would go, I'm going to go in there and renovate it and gut it, right? Renovating that property is not, you can't claim it because it's initial cost. It goes to your capital when you sell it off.
Correct.
But if you were to buy the property and rent it out, and then the tenant was real dodgy and caused a bit of damage to it, and you were told and advised by your real estate agent to go and repair the property, would that be claimable?
Yeah, so in those instances,
6 months' time?
Yeah, in those instances where you purchase a property, it's in between tenants or you've rented it out, tenants cause damage, you need to repair certain things. Vanities may be cracked, for example, toilets may be broken, kitchen cabinets, etc., all broken. Then those are not considered initial repairs with regard to that. So it is important that you cross-check with us what you're doing, because a lot of clients do a whole bunch of work and they go, oh my God, I can't claim any of it, and it becomes a problem. What is not claimable anymore is still the same as what it was not in previous years. Mm-hmm. So travel is still not claimable, for example. The depreciation element, where you purchase a property, it's existing, you can't claim the decline in the value. You can only claim decline on the capital items, so walls, floors, things you can't see.
And Jono just wrote scrapping value.
Scrapping is good, yeah. So Jono's really right. So if you are doing a genuine repair or you're doing a genuine renovation, which then you need to depreciate in future periods, so scrapping is deducted.
So what scrapping is, just for those of you that want to know layman term, if you've got a bathroom and the tiles might be more modern or whatever, you could get a depreciation report and say, well, this bathroom would cost $30,000 to put in if you were to get qualified tradespeople today to put it in. And the value of it is 20 years old, so it's got $3,000 or $5,000 value left. Well, when you rip it out, it has zero value left. So you put it in the bin and you get a report to say that you've thrown $5,000 worth of value of your property away. You can then go and take that $5,000 to Ridwan, and he'll be able to go, okay, we can take $5,000 off the tax bill. And taxable income. So then you can save against that. So yeah, that's what the scrapping is.
Yeah, so scrapping is really important. If you do have any questions, a lot of the depreciation report companies do scrapping reports. They're a little bit more costly because they factor into what Nathan was saying. So remaining value, cost of disposal, cost of the actual physical labor to get it out as well is all included in the scrapping. So it's really important when you're spending that money on anything, ask the right questions to get the right answers. If you don't ask the right questions, in fairness, some of the depreciation reports you can do retrospectively, but things like scrapping, it needs to be done pretty much live so that they can understand what was there. Purchase costs, there's no change in terms of what can be claimed or can't claim with regard to purchase costs. So your initial, reports, lawyers' fees. Lawyers' fees is a little bit which is claimable out of that, but the majority it's not. Or your pest and build, for example, they're all not claimable or deferred costs from a capital point of view. Depreciation limits. The reason I put that in there is that we do get a lot of clients who call us with reference to whether a depreciation report is required for particular properties. It's not that you shouldn't get a depreciation report on every property, but sometimes it's just not worthwhile, right? So you'll be in a position where if you've got depreciation on a property which is 30 years old, and you're spending $500 on a report, you might get $1,000 back over 7 years. So it might not be worth your while to spend that. So it's always good to give us a call and just determine whether or not you should get a depreciation report done, or speak to the depreciation report company that you're working with, or the one Nathan's working with, for example, and they'll give you a pretty good understanding over the phone whether or not you should be claiming any depreciation or at least commissioning a report. Yeah. Now, holiday homes been a really big topic over the last 3 years because everyone's bought a place up the coast, including Nathan, and they've all gone up there during a little bit of more of the rough times that's happened in Sydney, and I get a lot of queries regarding it. So this is an example directly out of the tax office's website in their example set. So Viraji owns a holiday home and has had a real estate agent who advertises the property for rent. The market rent is $1,000 a week. Viraji arranges for her to advertise it at $1,500 a week. Ergo, then the property is not really rented. So where a property is genuinely available for sale, it's available to the market in a free fair market, and it's not rented, then the tax office allow an exemption on the vacant property constraint that they have. So basically, if you've got a property which is not rented or not available for rent or empty block of land, you can't claim any of the holding costs. But in this instance, if you have a property which is not rented genuinely, you can claim all the costs and you get really big tax deductions for it. So a common strategy is that, person A will speak to the real estate agent and say, hey, I'll give you an extra $500 a year, just make my property not rent because I want to use it, for example, right? The tax office is onto that as well, and they understand that if, for example, that the rent is not market value, they'll just do a really simple search and they get RP data and what other tools there are to be able to value rents, and they will basically say, well, hang on, you're not renting this at market value, and they'll abrogate all your expenses, or in some instances, they'll disallow the deduction completely.
I have lots of business in Tree as you're quite aware. If I had a property that was a vacant block of land, I've got heaps of things to store. Like I've got shipping containers, I've got furniture, I've got office fit outs and stuff like that. If I was to rent the property, like purely just for a shipping container, because I can't store it in a unit, let's say, and I was getting $300 a month instead of, there's no house or whatever, would that be legitimate?
Yeah, so it's a good question. They do have a lot of example sets on that. So depend in terms of physical structure of the house, they actually go into a lot of specific detail, temporary, permanent, semi-temporary, semi-permanent dwellings. The short answer is that if that shipping container is there purely for you to be able to deduct what otherwise would be the full rental expense, and that's on the market value for that, they will then adjust accordingly your costs.
What about if I knew a little girl down the street and she has a horse, right? And she's looking to rent a block of land for a horse.
Yeah.
And adjust it.
Adjust it, yeah.
Or a chicken. If I rent it for a chicken.
One chicken wouldn't be enough. KFC might have a word with you.
What about if she wanted to grow a garden, right?
Look, the reality is there's a lot of different permutations, combinations. My short advice to that, Nathan, is that
when you had a holiday house, the house that was near the coast, that was not really well to rent out. If you had a house on the water, right? Let's say it was like right opposite the beach in I don't know, up the coast, right? And the place had no cornices in it, and the kitchen was half done and stuff like that, and you are financially stuck and you can't afford to get it finished, but it's not really up to the rentable standard to get X amount, and you just rent it out for $100 a week to someone that like, I don't know, your uncle or brother or sibling or something. Would that be legitimately rented then?
No, it wouldn't. So the short answer is no.
Why?
Because they would say that it's not market value. The same reverse to Viraji's
What's
problem.
the market value of a property missing the kitchen and the bathroom and stuff like that?
Yeah, and so what they would say is, okay, next door neighbours rent it out, it's all done. We'll allow you to rent it, we'll allow you to make deductions, but it will be abrogated to the amount of rent that you're coming in. So they basically reduce it. So again, the loopholes is a bad word, but the ways in which you can try and have more effective tax deductions is being closed. So it is important. But that being said, if you've got the property, it's fully rented out or it's rented out partially, for example, and you're doing a lot of different things, you're consuming it a little bit of the time, you still get some benefit out of it for sure, right? So instead of trying to look for the big wins, you maybe try and bleed them over a number of years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Next one. This one is a fun one, right? And very important. We're going to talk about something that we have not talked about beforehand tonight, and this is something we are going to we've got something very announce, right? We've got something to announce. So you start off. You start off with everything. Still, so it's super fun.
Super fun related or super related, right? So we specifically talk a lot about SMSFs because as accountants, we do the administration and the audit for self-managed super funds. Obviously, a lot of you might be invested in retail funds, so Aware Super, First State. They've got a new one called Australian Trust Retiree or something weird like that. But for super funds point of view, you can now have 6 persons funds. So it could be you, your wife, mum, dad, a whole bunch of different things. So if you don't have enough in a fund to get 2 or 3 people together to get the balance to open it up, you can get 6 now. So if everyone had, for example, 40 grand, 30 grand, And you're sort of in the money to be able to.
So if you only got 50 grand in your super and you think, fuck, I can't do it because I need 200 grand, you get 3 mates or 3 family members, or what you got to remember is that you're taking this to your deathbed, really. Like your super fund is like a long-term thing, so you don't want to be getting people that are going to be transient in your life and setting up super funds and stuff like that with. So you want to make sure that it's even like with siblings, right? Like if you've got 2 siblings and then people go get married or children, or one of them wants to travel or whatever, and then he gets divorced, she gets taken out of his super fund. So just be careful with who you're setting up with. But that's really cool that you can do 6, because if people have got 30k, 6 times 30k is 180k. You're sort of at the limit of being able to do a super fund and it being viable.
Yeah, for sure. And one important thing that Nathan's absolutely right in terms of your fund. You are sort of susceptible to the problems and the outcomes of any negative way of any particular member. The flip side to that is that no member can eat into another member's fund, right? Mm-hmm. So even though it's, in Nathan's example, 6 people at 30k, 180k, if that fund goes up and doubles, everyone's got 60k, right? And if that goes the other direction, everyone's got 15k, right? So no one will take from anyone else. So in that regard, there is some element of protection of your own fund, and that's how we manage it in the background. But that is a big change, because you might, for example, have your 4 direct families, your immediate family, and you go, well, look, mum and dad, actually they've got a couple of $100 grand each. We can bring them in, do another property, do another investment, whatever it might be, right? Lending is coming back, maybe. Now, the reason I wrote maybe is that the lending space of super funds has obviously changed pretty significantly. Back in the day when you probably started your fund, Nathan, St. George was the biggest lender in the market, and that was
paper-based.
It was all paper-based. Now all the mid-tier banks, tier 2, tier 3 banks are pretty much the sole lenders for the super fund space. However, I have sort of been hearing murmurs that some of the digital banks are coming out to lend in the super fund space, because it's not necessarily residentially focused completely. You can still do commercial properties, lands, everything else. But some of the digital banks that you find, Athena and all those other ones, are coming into that space. So once they come in, there'll be a little bit of a flattening of the monopoly that the current banks have over the super fund space, where they charge like wounded bulls. And I think once that happens, and then it sort of levels off a bit, and if there is a big sort of pullback in any lending in the residential space, the banks will eventually open it up again, because the super fund space sits well above what is the normal residential rate. You're talking about 2% more. That being said, a lot of the clients who did it, back when lending was 5 or 6 or 7, and they've all got their rate reductions in place, have done really well. Like some of our clients have done really, really well in their super. Obviously, superannuation is allowed to invest in property, crypto, shares, a whole bunch of different things. But be advised that if you have what's called a single asset or single issue fund, the tax office may ask you for some adjustments with regard to how your fund reports. Contributions caps. So coming up to 30 June, if you've got a self-managed super fund, you really do need to get any contributions that you're getting in there by the 29th of June, which is Thursday next week. And if you've got a retail fund, you really need to get that in probably by this week to be able to get it anywhere near to be claimed. Obviously, your limits for this year has gone up to 27,500. It's been indexed for inflation. And if you've got, say, an income of 150,000, then you've got about 12 grand that you can top up and put more into. And that's the case with self-managed super funds. So a lot of clients do that towards this end of the year to top up their super, to get into more properties and to get some tax deductions. That's a quick win. You'll love this one. Super's going up to 10.5% next year. And so for anyone who's an employee, make sure that your employer is actually paying your super to the 10.5%. And so you're actually getting the right amount. A lot of employers, when it flipped over from 9.5 to 10, didn't make that change. And so it shouldn't be as big a problem, because everyone's on STP at the moment. But just make sure your super is getting topped up at that right bit. Nathan, I wanted to get your view on one thing. I was reading the budget, I was reading the changes to super. For me, this really reminded me of GFC, because if you remember back in GFC, they cracked open the super limits. They said that you can put $1 million into your super. You can put whatever you want.
Liquidity crisis, right?
Those are liquidity crisis. They gave everyone $900. Now they're giving, doctors, nurses,
they're giving
healthcare workers.
Car, they're giving you everything. They're giving you staff. They're giving you everything.
Do you see any replication happening?
Okay. we're in a depression, right? And we don't even know about it. We've been in a depression. The definition of a depression is that your lifestyle is less than what it was beforehand, right? And people's lifestyle, they're more enslaved, more committed, more, hot to the hill, should we say, for their whole lifestyle than what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and whatnot. We're on the cusp of a massive depression, and this depression is unavoidable, right? It's just when will it occur? The quicker it occurs, the less risk it'll be, the less problem it'll be. The more that it's ponzied away, the bigger that issue is becoming.
If you remember the GFC, what do they do to all the funds?
They're frozen, right? So I think it's very important to be diligent and things to do to protect yourself. So pretty much what I see happening is that, they're sucking all this liquidity out of the system. And what I'm experiencing with people that are setting up self-managed super funds is that it's like you're a criminal for getting your own money. They're like, tell us, what are you doing with the money? This, that, the next. I want to know. It takes forever. Because they've got no money. They have to sell down the stock, right? So the more that they do that, the market's like, I speak to people and they'll go, how much are you got in your super? And they go, oh, I think I had 120 and now it's about 110. It's like, well, didn't we just go through the biggest fucking stock market boom ever? Right? We're going through inflation. How's that going for you, right? This lady, she knows who she is, and she just wrote in here beforehand, claiming property repairs for a property in a self-managed super fund. Does that have the same criteria? You know who you are. Like, I remember talking to you about a year ago before you set up your super fund, and you said that the market fell. So, for example, from like January, let's say November 2019, a unit was like 95 cents, right? And then it crashed, and then it came back like a year ago. So 2 years later, it came out last year, and you would expect a fucking boom, but it's gone up, everything's gone crazy, and it was like $1, right? So that's really gone up by 3% or 4% in a year or 2 years in the biggest boom that we've ever seen. And it's like, hang on a second, that same 100 grand, if you had 100 grand in your super, that wouldn't buy the same shit that it would 2 years ago. So there's a lot of, ugly stuff in there. People generally, if you're trying to get your money out, like, your money's going to get frozen in there because there's no liquidity in this market. So if you are looking to protect yourself, like I always say, I can't be a financial advisor. I'm not your financial advisor. I can't give you financial advice and all that. And I just really don't give a fuck about saying that. I do say it just because in case there's any communist people watching from ASIC or wherever, I just want them to be aware that I'm not being totally reckless here with my comments because they don't understand where I'm coming from because they just physically don't get the system they're enslaved to. But anyway, moving along. I see that there's very little safe havens out there in these markets, right? You put your money into the crypto market, right? This has got a lot more further to go, right? You put your money in the share market, that's got a lot further to go. You put your money in cash, well, then it's going to be paying you nothing, and it's going to be gobbling away at your capital. It's not going to do what it did beforehand. You put your money into property, well, then it's kind of stuck in there, and you need the liquidity buffer for that. So as of, like, when is it going to happen?
I'll probably say in the next 6 weeks.
Next 6 weeks. So in the next 6 weeks, I'm getting access to my own sort of, how would we explain it, right? Like, it's not me, I'm not the financial advisor, but I'm getting access to
we're partnering with a AFSL provider, which we will have pretty good connection with and connection with. So that way
we've been able to do what we want in that space instead of, because we don't really trust too much that comes from the financial advice space, right? I don't trust too much from there. But
I think the best way to categorize it is that previously there's been some paternalistic ways in which you can invest and what needs to happen with an AFSL, which is governed by a much more smaller board. Then you have a little bit more of an understanding, and we're getting some partners in play which will allow us to actually look at everyone, do the right thing, but be a little bit more focused in terms of how the clients that we serve would like to invest.
So in the next short while, whether it be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 3 months, whatever, we will be having the opportunity for people to invest with high returns, which are stronger than the bank, with, you know, the amount of collateral, right? A part of what I've always said was, I want to build a bank, right? And what does the bank have, right? The bank, people think the bank has money. You go in and take money out, put money in, you write a loan, whatever. But the bank is layers and layers and layers of made up of all different sort of financial instruments, derivatives, bonds, all these different things. And the bank is really, in my view, a Ponzi scheme, right? But I want to build a bank, and what does a bank have, right? Like the bank can give you a return. You go and set up a fixed term deposit, and you go and put in, I don't know, $1,000, $100,000, whatever, and you'll get a 0.1% return, or a 0.5%, or a 1% return. And if the bank goes broke, which they did a lot in the GFC, gives your money really protected, etc., etc. I guess one of the things that we're working on is we're going to have a product which will pay a very healthy return, which is greater than an average mortgage that's out there, and it will be backed via, you know, contractually backed by assets, property assets. So it's not going to be a property fund, it's going to be an income fund, which will be based up from, I'll be running my own property fund, which doesn't mean that you'll be buying properties in there, doesn't mean that it'll be, you know, paying, like, you're not buying properties in it because they're all, you know, rented, but it'll be exposure to the properties, and it'll be contractually obliged that your capital would be protected throughout any market with a much higher return, as I'm saying, higher than mortgage rates that would be applicable. So whether you've got $1,000 to invest, whether you've got $10,000 to invest, whether you've got $1 million to invest, I know that there's a lot of people that are coming to me saying, my parents, they need a good retirement, you know, they've got $500,000, how can they protect themselves? You know, you put it in the bank, you lose your money, whatever. I actually know people that go, I've got $1 million of debt and I've got $1 million worth of equity in my account. Could I invest it, right? And I can't give you that financial advice because I'm not the financial advisor, but there will be, you know, some perspectives and all that sort of stuff surrounding it. But in short, you know, if someone was to have $1 million that they wanted to invest, or $1 million worth of loan, hypothetically, and you're paying 3% and you're getting 7%, just hypothetically making up some numbers here, you'd be making a profit of 4% on top. So 4% of $1 million is 40 grand a year. You're paying 30 grand for your debt. You're getting 70 grand back. You don't have to do anything. You're making 40 grand spread on it. So yeah, we will be having a launch of this very shortly, to a very small pool, and then we will grow the fund from being the first fund into multiple different funds. And these will be more for like a yielding sort of fund, which will be a direct cash flow fund. It's not, you know, someone just wrote there, what is the money going to be used for? It's going to be used purely 110%. Well, it's only 100% because there's only 100% there, but for cash flowing assets, which will be tied to that fund. So your funds would be invested into property. The returns would be paid back via a cash flow to everybody. So if you were to, you can go and invest into a Vanguard or some other sort of derivative, but you go invest into a commercial property fund, you would be putting it into, you think you'd be buying into a Westfield, or you're buying all these shops or wherever they are, but in reality, Westfield doesn't go to Combank and say, we're doing an extension, give us a 95% LVR. They go and create these sort of products. I will be running this fund and being able to deliver the results, and it is a locked-in, guaranteed year after year cash flow return that would be repaid to every single investor. So a lot of people say, virtually, I'd love to invest on a micro level or whatever. I don't want to deal with the day-to-day risk of it. I would be running the fund, and you would be getting the returns at the set figure. It's a guaranteed figure that's year after year, month after month, that you would be invested into. So it's something very unique, something I've certainly not done beforehand. I do it on a daily basis for myself. So it's sort of like you're piggybacking my success as an investor and getting benefit of that return. Fully regulated, coming from all the government compliance and stuff that needs to be done. And if you are interested, you could email to the email address on the screen, take a screenshot of this, take a photo of it, and yeah, send over an email if you're interested. info@onepathaccounts.com.au with the email subject SMSF opportunity.
Just as a note, we don't give investment advice. So
yeah,
because we haven't got that full fund and launched, that full product and launched it yet. So just taking inquiries. We're not spruiking anything, or there's not going to be any sort of they do A, B, C, and D. It's just to sort of understand what the interest levels are in that regard. You can obviously email Nathan in his office, but I just put my email up there for now.
Yeah, so none of this is like, there's no financial advice on this. There will be, you know, it'll all be regulated and all that sort of stuff. I'm the property dude, I make deals happen all the time. It's a different way of being able to invest and piggyback onto that with the surety knowing that you're getting a return that's far exceeded any other sort of you know, market out there. This is backed purely via myself and with all different sorts of things in place. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few questions that we're probably going to answer at some point. I think I'm hearing some of it for the first time. So I think one of the things that we probably you can clarify is it could be a number of different deals.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be one particular type of deal. I think the one that we'd spoken about a number of years ago is you might find a fantastic commercial property with a great AAA rated tenant, and you can just do a deal on it. And then you can.
It'll be the cash flow. It'll be the funding of it. So it's a funding.
Okay,
it's a funding fund. It's not like you're investing into, you know, but it's a fund that the cash flow it's a cash flow fund on it. So it's not like you're buying an index that goes up and it's like, you know, is a share going to go up from $1 to $10 and back down to 20 cents? It's a guaranteed capital return. Like it's like a term deposit. It's what the thing is. So yeah.
Next slide, and we'll probably come back to the questions after that.
You got lots of questions coming through from that. So Damo just said, if you've got 10 years down the track, how do you cash out? That will all be covered off in the prospectus. Mark said he sounds good to have had some SMS cash involved in something similar in the US since about 2012 by Steve McKnight. Cash flow positive commercial assets. That's correct. Adam just wrote, look out BlackRock. Let's look out BlackRock, eh? I don't think I'm as cool as those guys, but where it's a view of like, there's not many places that you can create a solid fund that's like legit. Like they're all Ponzi schemes out there. So like this is something that my whole I'm tied to, right? I'm literally tying myself into this fund. So yeah.
Yes, I'll definitely take you up on that offer.
Who's that? Oh yes. So yeah, that person that said about the we've got someone that's watching this in our video, which is not someone that, you know, it's from the compliance that we would you know, is a very welcoming friend to us here, that said that if you would like some assistance with the AFSL compliance, because this person actually deals with this on a daily basis, we would love to take up and have your involvement in there. He said, hey mate, with the property SMSF, do you have to have a minimum of money or limit of people to join the cash flow fund? As for the fund, you don't need to have it. I should make this clear. It's not just for your super fund, right? If you have your super fund, you can invest money from your super fund into it. Some people have liquidity where they might have 20 grand left over, 50 grand left over, whatever in their fund. Like we're not you know, saying to set up a super fund of 30 grand or anything like that. You must have specific requirements from it, and it's very important to get that structure set up. Everybody's position is different. We've seen people do it with 300 grand in there. We've seen people do it with 120 grand in there, but it comes down to the compliance risk and the financial advisor to sign that off. So that all comes down to independent advice from out of that. But do reach out if someone had 100 grand of personal cash or 10 grand of personal cash, they could invest in this fund. It doesn't mean that it has to be in their super. It is in their personal names as well that this will be open to. So just to clarify that.
That's my wife.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, cool.
All those
all
those things will be disclosed.
All that stuff will be coming to those that register their interest via a sort of prospectus and all the compliance stuff to make sure that we're legit for the government, so no one ever questions anything, and that ultimately making sure that everybody's capital is safe. This is a market, just be very clear out there and careful. People's money has been gobbled up, right? I've seen bodgy, we've seen bodgy types of funds that have been set up there, right? Like I know someone's in here that had their money caught up in that, right? That commented we're bros, right? Like it's Clive. He had his money stuck into a fund, which was just Ponzi scheme. There's so many Ponzi schemes out there. People don't realize that their super funds are based in big Ponzi schemes, right? How many people's super funds were exposed to Revlon last week? How many people's super funds are exposed to zombie companies that are constantly, doing bad things out there? So make sure that you have control over that. And, if your money's in the bank, then good luck to you, right? I actually just realized this one here, I'm going to leave you to explain, but why did we choose a photo with chemtrails in it, bro?
With what?
Chemtrails. Look, the lines in the sky, they're fake clouds. That's the worst thing ever. Anyway, I'll leave it over to Rid to talk about trusts or no trust.
Okay, so I get questions all the time on trusts or not to trust. And there's a lot of property spruikers out there. There's a lot of people who give really bad advice on this. I'm just going to say it straight. There's some clients who get absolutely shafted because they've got 3 properties and 3 trusts. And it's just a huge pet peeve of mine where people who could invest that money into a property portfolio get stuck with a trust. Now, I've talked about that ad nauseum over the years. But one of the biggest changes, or not biggest changes, I'd say the biggest reinvigorations of a particular section of the trust law is section 100A. It's existed for many, many years, but the way in which it's applied by the tax office has been, in some regards, more relaxed than what they've approached it with now. So it's a very topical thing for accountants, trust lawyers, and estate planners at the moment. Basically, section 100A is very complicated, but the way that you want to consider it is follow the money, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people use trusts in a way to stream income. And a lot of people use trust in the way which they use it for the most tax-effective purposes. So, Nathan, you might have children, for example. You've got a property which has either capital or capital gains, so income or capital gains that you need to stream. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, Mini Nathan 1 and Mini Nathan 2 get 20 grand each because they're all over 20 and they're not working.
So well, your kids will be like, they were popping them out when I was like 16. I probably was actually, so it might come by me one day soon.
Now, the tax office says they've actually got to get that money.
Yeah.
You can't just allocate it to them,
mm-hmm.
and you can't just say that they have it,
mm-hmm.
or that they're owed the money by the trust, or you've paid expenses on their behalf. Mm-hmm. There's a very complicated, well, not very complicated, it's something that made complicated, which is called the ordinary family arrangement, which there's been really, a lot of conjecture over. So basically trusts in where you are using that trust and the beneficiary of the trust for purely tax advantage, tax efficiencies and tax advantage purposes is being abrogated quite a lot, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's been a huge pushback on this by the accounting world and all the trust lawyers and the tax lawyers out there. And the HO's not backtracked, but they've softened or they've clarified their position. So as of recently, they have now a green and red zone. They used to have a middle blue zone, which was very difficult to navigate. The green zone is easy. Everyone's, who's right is right. The red zone is very prescriptive in saying what is wrong. So if you have a trust or you're considering setting up a trust and you get all these spruikers who actually don't know what they're selling, I guess, you need to know whether or not the trust is going to be applicable for you and your family network. So if you've got a situation where you've got children who are of age who can receive trust distributions, those children effectively then get divorced, then a lot of your trust assets may not be as protected as you once thought, or at least the income for it. So
what about a bloodline trust?
It all works in the same, right? So all of these type of trusts can sort of fit into those family trust, bloodline trust, whatever you want to call it, and they all work in very similar operations. But Section 100A and all the other trust laws sit on top of it, right? So you'll be in a position where you need to be in a pretty sound state of affairs with regard to your trust distributions, minutes, and all those type of different things, to make sure that you're not in breach of Section 100A, because basically the tax office says if they see that this is just purely an arrangement, they'll tax you the top rate. So you lose all the effectiveness out of the trust, all the money you spent setting it up and whatnot, and they can actually go back.
Yeah.
And they go back a pretty significant period, right? So we need to understand what it means to actually be invested in a trust. A lot of people do trust for asset protection, income streaming. If one of those arms falls off because it's not as effective, what is the alternative? Now, back to what we were talking about 10 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago, a slide ago. If you have a fund, you might be able to be in a position where you can have a portion of your investment in your name. The ATO, with respect to that question from ADS-D, they can go, in personal terms, they can go back 5 years, 3 years, sorry, in company terms 5 years, but with respect to this, they can go back a lot further. So I think what you need to do is look at alternatives. Having your assets inside of a trust is still beneficial, without a doubt. Still definitely pay a big extent, but I think the commonality of how often people recommend trusts need to be reconsidered. So creating funds, creating other ways, in ways you can protect your assets is important. So we might have to get another update from you in the future with regard to what the alternative could be. At the moment, trust is still very viable. There's a lot of different types of trusts, but you need to know whether or not it's actually going to be as applicable as you once thought.
Yeah, well, we should get spell check on here because it says, Nathan, what is the alternative? The thing is, looking at trusts, I break it down when I'm speaking to investors. It's obviously a question I get asked on a daily basis with my investors. You know, what should they be doing, etc. Most of the large portfolios I see have no trust. You need to also factor in all the tax benefits outside of the trust. So, for example, if you bought a property under a trust from day one, I can literally pick up the map form, right? When I do a map session with one of my investors or a portfolio review, I can see who on their team has screwed them sideways, right? I can tell whether it's their broker, I can tell whether it's their accountant or their financial advisor, just by looking at what they've done. So I did a map session maybe 18 months ago with someone, and they had no assets. They only owned one block of land inside a trust, right? And it was 500 grand worth of loan, and they were paying the loan. You couldn't access it. All these losses were trapped inside. If let's say we go buy a property, right? Say that, I don't know, like you have a couple of people and they can have up to 750k, just roughly, of land tax free threshold, right? We talked about the land tax free threshold. It's 1.6% of anything over 780k, 800k.
74, I think it is.
Yeah, let's say 750, right? Husband and wife can have 1.5 combined between them in it, and if you have a unit in Parramatta that's got the land component of 200 grand or something like that, you could fit 7 or 8 of them inside the trust. If you were to go and buy these under your personal name, sorry, so the land tax free threshold, you could buy a lot of these properties. I would be utilizing all of that land tax free threshold plus the negative gearing. Like if you have a property that's negative geared, or when I say negative geared, it doesn't need to be negative geared. It could be the depreciation that then takes it over to give you the cash flow. Those tax credits are trapped within inside your trust. So be very mindful that when you're putting it into the trust, I see people just go, I'll put in the trust, put in the trust, put in the trust. Like, I've got fucking dozens of trusts, right? I've got cupboards full of trusts. I don't even know what the fuck they do. Sometimes I sit there, what's this name again? What's in there? But I have them for different things. I have a GST trust for ones that have GST attached to it, and all different things. But it depends where you're at. I still buy properties under my personal name. But yeah, I can tell the the ability of an accountant from the questions that are asked, right? So when someone is using an accountant, the questions that are asked, you know, should I get a trust, right? If you ask an accountant, should I get a trust, you'll have a dodgy accountant. Like if you're doing a tax return, what's the standard tax return? Like the cost of the standard tax, $220 for a tax return. People say go become a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant, right? If you're getting fucking $50 an hour, you stick your finger up someone's bum or whatever at the doctor's surgery, it's not really the greatest job, right? If you're the accountant earning $200 to do a tax return, you're not like, it's made up a lot more glorified, right? There's a lot of dodgy accountants out there that will say, oh, you should have a trust from day one. You should set up 3 trusts, right? But what they're doing is, how much does it cost for a trust for you?
Stacking the fee base.
They're stacking the fees, right? Their books are made up of all these fees that you're paying. It's like, oh, nil return, nil return, nil return. But they're looking after their own thing. So I know if you talk to your accountant and they just say, yeah, buy a trust from day one, if your accountant suggests to buy a trust from day one, they're probably trying to shaft you and get extra revenue out of you. If you speak to your accountant, they go, oh, the trust, I don't know much about those things. Well, then your accountant doesn't have a strong enough skill set. They're just like more like a bookkeeper. So you need to make sure that you have strategy around, you know, estate planning and, you know, not financial planning, but like just, you know, where you're buying properties today, you might be 20, in 20 years time, you'll be 40. Like my fucking hair's turned grey. I just got a haircut today and they're shaving. I'm like, there's all this white shit falling out. Who's this old prick I'm looking at in the mirror, right? And it's me, right? Last time I looked, I was in my 20s. And this time changes, right? So who you are today, where you're at, and where your properties will be in the future, you need to sort of map that out and work out, you know, how's it going to all work for me? And is it really needed? You need to have those discussions with your advisors, being your tax advisor, which is where Ridwan comes in, or whoever your tax advisor is. So that's my view on it, on a trust. And also be mindful that when you add an element of a trust to a finance application, your loan becomes more of a commercial by nature, because you have to have sign-offs and, you know, all these different things as you being the guarantor for the trust.
Correct, yeah.
There is pros and cons.
Can become complicated, or can become in a little bit too hard basket for a lot of brokers and banks and whatnot. So they sort of, you know, focus on the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So tax tips for 2023, I would suggest is that you speak to your accountant. If you haven't, certainly give us a call. We can definitely help you with regard to try ways you can minimize your tax. Obviously, as I've said throughout the webinar, things that you can spend on properties and or your own expenses with regard to work-related expenses or otherwise, or if you own your own business, you can bring those forward. But certainly give us a call, speak to us, speak to your accountant. As long as you've got a good accountant, we're happy with that because we want everyone to go forward. So I think for 2023, just have a look at all the different things you're doing, make sure you're compliant, and we can get in touch with you, or you can get in touch with us. Just give us a call or an email, and the office should get them back in touch with you.
Yeah. So yeah, just maybe if you are thinking of doing your tax this year, which we're all fucking confident of doing that, if you are thinking of doing your tax, take a photo of this, get your phone out, take a photo if you've got RID's details. Just mention to him that, you know, you were part of tonight's sort of webinar and presentation, and just, you know, RID will have a chat with you. Like, you know, when you sit with a lawyer or an accountant, they can sometimes push like the taxi meter where the fare starts. You go on the travel and you're fucking paying for that. Just mention you know, you've been watching and you've come from, you know, the webinar, and that's where we've come from today. And Ridwan will have what, like a 15-minute chat or something?
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
a bit of a discovery of where you're at.
We try and make sure that we grow as you grow. So our goal is not just, as Nathan said, to turn on the meter and then send you out the door with a bill. You know, if you get 2 properties, that's better for us. So our goal is to have all clients sort of achieve their own financial independence goals and what they would like to achieve. And I think clients know that we're in a position where we try and help. Charging and fees and all that is part of the parcel, and we're very upfront with that. And you'll find that it's a pretty good service and good people to deal with. Not just me, they're a whole team. So that's really good.
RID's got like dozens of staff, and you know, yeah, you got a good team, and that's why we work together, and appreciate it. And
thank you for having me on.
I think that everybody that's going to get extorted from the tax man this year should have Ridwan as their bodyguard and his team as their bodyguard. So reach out, ask a question, write a list of questions, ask your current accountant questions, ask Ridminder questions, compare them. If you're speaking to them for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever, make that decision. You're going to be paying someone to do it, and you may as well
give the clients examples. And if have a chat with me, have a chat with them. If you get the same answers, then great. We're not in the business of divorcing clients from their accountants. We're just in the business of helping them. But if you feel like you get a better service or better responses from us, we're more than happy to help. We don't charge for that. So yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, sir.
No problems. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks to everyone coming in tonight and spending your Wednesday evening with us. I thought it was very timely that we get you on before the end of financial year. So yeah, hopefully it's been fruitful for everybody. And yeah, look forward to
tuning in.
And if you are interested in that opportunity, it's not even going out to the public. Like, you guys are the only people that know about it. So yeah, if you are interested in that fund, send the email over to Ridminer's office. Ridminer is not the financial advisor, financial planner, or anything like that. We are getting interest together at the moment, and I will be launching that to give stability out there to people to be able to know that their hard-earned assets are safe and that they're getting a great return on it during the depression. We'll catch up soon, guys. Keep being awesome, and bye for now.
Take care.